You should retire early if you truly despise me. It's pitiful that you even speak to me as an elderly, inept man who is almost ready to retire. It hurts my brain to hear Nancy scream like that. Up until today, she has had a bad attitude. She once told me to go buy coffee, and her stockings had a run, so she told me to purchase hers instead. She also requested me to make sure she had locked her residence. Nancy thought that I was a slave or something. Okay, I'll give up. I informed her that I was leaving the company where I had spent 44 years of my career because I could no longer work with her. Later, Nancy yelled as she stormed into my new job. I let out a sigh. The product I created swiftly rose to the top of the market. Naturally, this company would sell the patent since I own it. My statements left Nancy speechless. Since my new business now sells the best-selling goods, customers will inevitably start purchasing from us. Our business quickly took the lead in industry sales again. I'm Will Miller, a 62-year-old worker at a company that processes glass. I started working here as soon as I graduated from high school. Since our business has expanded, we now hire primarily recent college graduates. However, when it was a little business with only a dozen or so employees, everyone was a high school graduate. I met someone at this company, which is why I joined. I was in a technical high school at the time, but my homeroom instructor had given up on me since I was a miscreant. Since I was a young child, my parents had a tense relationship, and I frequently questioned why they never got divorced. As I got older, I found out that their marriage had been shattered for a long time and that they both had other relationships. They never considered divorce because they both did what they wanted. It was hard for me to do well growing up in such a household, so I spent my evenings stirring up trouble with my neighborhood pals. Those close to me said that my high school graduation was a miracle. Since the institution was respectable and didn't want dropouts, I believe they made me graduate. Naturally, I didn't take my job search seriously, so I hadn't found one even before I graduated. I was working part-time at a movie theater at the time, and I had the idea that I would eventually work there full-time. Then I met my current company's former president, Thomas. Thomas was in his second year as an employed adult and 5 years older than me. Thomas visited the store nearly daily because his business was close to the movie theater where I worked part-time. Since Thomas smoked, we frequently gathered in the smoking area before striking up a conversation. Thomas told me that expanding the little business into a major enterprise was his dream. He expressed his sincere gratitude to the then president and said he remained with the company to pay back the loan. I think I just paid half attention to what he said at the time. I had never had to work to pay back a debt of appreciation. But Thomas continued to watch out for me, a dreamless person, and he pushed for me to work for his organization. Now that I think about it, he must have pleaded fervently as a second-year employee because he wouldn't have had much power at the time. When I first joined the company, I was a gullible idiot who was just grateful for a job, but after witnessing Thomas's work, my perspective was totally altered. For in order to realize the ideal he shared with me at the movie theater, Thomas put forth more effort than anyone else. He consistently generated results and would even challenge his superiors if he believed it would benefit the company. Thomas was really awesome. Before I realized it, realizing Thomas's dream had become my own. Our business was already well known around the world when Thomas took over as president at the age of 46. I was proud to have worked with Thomas, and I will never be able to replace those memories. But 2 years ago, Thomas was able to retire. Even though I was lonely working for a firm without him, I felt compelled to defend the business he loved. Richard Anderson, an employee, succeeded Thomas. Despite being young at 37, Thomas saw that Anderson had a knack for sales. The appointment of such a young employee as president was, of course, met with resistance. Thomas, however, was determined to install Richard as president. Richard was the one who, in my opinion, had the best grasp of Thomas's management philosophy. Richard took over as president in accordance with Thomas's wishes, and our business has been growing even more since. The presence of our department head, Nancy Wilson, is the one issue, though. Nancy, who is 44, is our company's first female department head. Our company employs a large number of international workers because Thomas wanted to design items that were culturally sensitive. Nancy gradually increased her accomplishments and became the head of the department. Prior to Thomas's retirement, she was quiet and reclusive, but she has gradually evolved. She began snapping at the other staff members. As a man, how are you unable to even submit a proper report? How have things gone for you thus far? You will be fired if you turn in another careless report like this one. After being screamed at in public, a young worker became so upset that he stopped going to work. I later viewed the report that had been the subject of all the criticism, and it was flawlessly written. That is to say, Nancy's charges were unfounded. Nancy Wilson's severe charges have caused a number of other employees to resign in addition to that young worker. I often told Richard, I think you should seriously talk to Nancy, because of Nancy's awful behavior. Richard, however, never gave a clear answer. Yes, I am aware of that. In actuality, Richard is overly kind by nature, even if he has outstanding managerial abilities. Confronting people is not his strong suit. Thomas, on the other hand, had a strong opinion and would never put up with anything that he felt was improper, even if it meant making female coworkers cry. Richard, however, was unable of doing that. Richard feels unable to speak to Nancy despite the fact that she has been acting terribly. You realize that we can't continue in this manner? Yes, without a doubt. Richard's response made me sigh. I'll speak with Nancy. Richard looked pitying as he said, I know it might be difficult for you as her junior. I'm sorry. Richard is as young as a son to me, and I have always loved him as a junior. Thomas was aware of Richard's timidity from the moment he chose him president. I believed that if Nancy was confronted, she would change her attitude and that I could manage what Richard couldn't. However, I quickly saw how foolish that was. I went up to Nancy's desk a few days later. Do you have a moment? She questioned, gazing up languidly and tinkering with her phone. Although I was senior in years of service and age, she officially outranked me because I didn't have a managerial position. What about your recent actions? I believe you're treating the younger staff members too harshly. My remarks caused Nancy's eyebrow to quiver. Too severe. Perhaps they're simply not performing their duties effectively. As their boss, I'm merely explaining what's required. What does not doing their duties properly imply to you specifically? I read the report that you criticized, and it was well written and understandable. I believe your charges are unfounded. I told her everything, even though I wasn't sure whether I had gone too far. Perhaps your judgment is flawed if you believe that report was poorly written. What if I spent some time reviewing the reports? We can then evaluate their quality more accurately. Naturally, my statement wasn't solely based on my personal viewpoint. The chiefs of the other departments all agreed that the problematic report was properly done after I showed it to them. This proved that Nancy had a little distorted perception. Are you implying that I am beneath you? An elderly, nearly retired dead weight with no job. That was too much, I thought, letting out an inward groan. I'm not saying you're below me, but for report checks, it might be better to align with my perspective. Our subordinates anxiously observed our chat. Nancy was obviously annoyed, but I was also really obstinate and couldn't give up when I wasn't at fault. You're implying that I'm beneath you? It makes me nauseous to talk to you. Since I'm in charge of this division, everyone should obey me. None of your subordinates will follow you if you keep thinking like that, I said icily in response to Nancy's scathing remarks. She ground her teeth and her eyes went red. All right then. You review every report. Do it all yourself if you have complaints. I finished it. She stormed out of the office after throwing the submitted reports at me. I let out a sigh, feeling completely powerless. Nancy's actions worsened the following day. Will you handle this meeting for me? She said, pushing her client meetings onto me in addition to refusing to review the reports. She forced me to do things that had nothing to do with my employment, which was bad enough. She once advised me to get coffee. She once told me that her pantyhose had a run and that I should buy hers. She also requested me to make sure she had locked her residence. Nancy thought that I was a slave or something. Please don't assign me non-work-related chores. You ought to be reviewing the reports on your own. I stated forcefully, I've reached my limit, and Nancy's eyebrows shot up in a glare. You do what I tell you to do. I will actually terminate you if you continue to talk back. You're just a worthless relic from the former president. I always wondered why this company kept someone so useless, but I remained quiet because you were connected to him. The sound of Nancy's screams made my head ache. Thomas and I were great friends, so it's true that we spent a lot of time together. We seldom ever discussed employment. Call me useless if you want, but I'd near retirement, and it would be better if you could handle checking the reports yourself. I refrained from yelling and clarified what needed to be done for the benefit of the business. Following Thomas's retirement, Nancy was elevated to the position of department head. She had previously been a quiet, hard-working worker who completed her tasks without complaining. I therefore understood when I heard that she had been promoted, even if it was based on seniority. I had no idea she had such a secret side. What's wrong with you? Are you fond of mocking me? Take an early retirement if you truly despise me. It's pitiful that an elderly man who is inept and very close to retirement would even speak to me. Nancy became wild and yelled violently. I said, "That's enough for today," and retreated when I realized this was not going anywhere. The management of this organization would soon degrade if Nancy continued to lead her department. I felt compelled to take action to stop that, but Nancy's startling behavior the following day crushed my soul. When I got to work the following day, I discovered a suit on my desk completely torn to bits. Thomas had purchased the suit for me as soon as I started working for the company. I worked in overalls most of the time, but occasionally I needed a suit. At the time, I didn't have a suit and wasn't sure how to pick one. My name was stitched on a suit that Thomas had ordered for me. It wasn't inexpensive. He laughed and replied, "I think of you like a brother," in response to my question about why he went to such lengths for a complete stranger. "We're brothers now, even though you may not have had a family before." I had never experienced parental love before. Therefore, it was the first time I felt the love of family. I've worn the suit when necessary and kept it in my locker at work ever since. On my desk now, that garment was in ruins. Nancy burst out laughing as I stood there dumbfounded. "I take it that Thomas got you that suit? I figured I'd assist you get rid of it since it wasn't your style and it was costly. You're really welcome." I realized then that she was the one who had done it. I'm glad I didn't grab her. In high school, Thomas had forced me to quit fighting. All I said was, "I quit." After 44 years, just short of retirement, I quit the company I loved because I was afraid that if I said anything more, I could wind up beating her. I started working at a new company the day after I quit. I went to say farewell to a customer when I made the decision to quit, and Daniel Johnson, their president, immediately scouted me. Daniel didn't think I was actually going anywhere at first. "Oh, you love joking around," he asked with a laugh. However, he was stunned into silence for a few minutes when I reiterated that I was indeed quitting. Why is a master who created the industry's top product retiring? He was obviously uneasy since his voice was tremulous when he eventually spoke. As an inept worker who was on the verge of retirement, I was fired. I couldn't continue working under that department head, even if I didn't want to quit. I explained my decision to depart President Johnson in detail. He listened in silence, but his face flushed red with rage when I told him that Nancy had torn my suit. How could she have destroyed the suit that Thomas had purchased for you? That woman has what type of nerve? Would you be willing to work for my company then? I accepted President Johnson's offer and began working for his organization. His business dealt with glass items, same like my former one, so I could apply what I learned there. I had a range of feelings on my first day with President Johnson's organization. President Johnson's assistance when I lost my job was invaluable, but I always assumed I would retire from Thomas's company. I still didn't feel like I was in a different company. President Johnson addressed me after observing my condition. "I know how much you loved having your former companion around. Thomas was also very helpful to me. I'm genuinely delighted to be working with you for the years I have left before I retire because of this." I was comforted by his words. I had honestly lost my sense of purpose at work since Thomas's retirement, but now I sincerely wanted to work for and assist President Johnson. I was speaking with President Johnson 2 months after I began working for his company when I was called out to by my subordinate, David Davis. "There's a call for you from someone named Wilson." President Johnson and I stared at each other when Nancy's name was called, and David appeared quite disturbed. Can you tell her I'm not available? I think the majority of people in the sector were aware that I had changed companies. Nancy knew I was here, which was not surprising, but it was impressive that she called. I doubt she'll give up that easily, I replied. President Johnson groaned. I agree, and I nodded, exhausted. That day, Nancy called every half hour. David had to repeat stating I wasn't available, and I felt awful for him. He began making up excuses after the 5th call, claiming that I was out getting coffee. Your schedule, she said, sounding quite irate. Well, David responded, his expression utterly irritated. I told her that we don't share employee schedules. My response to David's snort was, thanks, I don't mind, but I bet she'll show up here first thing tomorrow morning. I smiled at his scary prognosis. But when I got to work the following day, David's forecast came to pass. Nancy was standing in front of the office, which was still closed. I typically show in a little early than the other staff members. My head ached to think of how long she had been there. Nancy came running over and yelled, "What have you done?" When she saw me, she gave me a forceful slap across the cheek. My head twitched from the contact, stunned by the suddenness. You are the reason our business is done. How will you respond to this? Nancy took hold of my collar and gave me a hard shake. Stop it. I was too stunned by the slap to resist. What do you think you're doing? David yelled loudly, ran over, and dragged Nancy away from me. Something didn't feel right. I'm happy I arrived early. In fact, David had arrived much earlier than usual. In light of what he said yesterday, I had the vague idea that David might be gifted at foretelling the future. Are you all right, Will? It looks like you're out of it. Has something occurred? My consciousness finally returned as David gave me a worried look, and I answered, I'm okay. That's good to hear. Nancy pulled David's shirt violently while I was speaking to him. Is this the infamous Wilson? David asked me, disregarding what Nancy had said. He turned back to Nancy with a sympathetic expression when I nodded. Hey, this is David, the person you talked to on the phone yesterday. With Will, what do you want? David spoke to Nancy in a way that intimidated me more than I had ever seen him do. David is the most flexible worker in terms of my working style, despite the fact that he is 37 years old and not particularly young. It's easy to get obstinate and unreceptive to the opinions of others after working for a while. But David excels at combining the best aspects of other people's approaches into his own. Did you hire a bodyguard at your new job? Nancy laughed mockingly and sneered. She wasn't too far away, I thought. David had willingly answered her call yesterday because he liked me. If you wish, think of me as your bodyguard. You must go via me first if you need to speak with Will. I'll find someone who is just as bossy as I am. Are you giving him all of your work? She must have realized that she was acting like an errand boy toward me. At last, David snapped and seized Nancy by the collar. Cut it out already. When I saw this, I immediately drew David away because I thought he might hit her. Let's talk in the office if you have anything to say. Fighting outdoors would only lead to issues for the business. After calming David down, I made the decision to talk to Nancy. I took Nancy inside and showed her the meeting room. Why not just leave her on the floor? David proposed. However, it would be too concerning to have her in a location where new hires may see her, so I chose to use the conference room instead. David wanted to join us, but I calmed him down and we went into the meeting room with Nancy. By myself. Why have you come here today? How can you say that so calmly? Nancy gave me a fierce look. Because you took our primary product's rights. We've seen a sharp decline in sales. We didn't even make a tenth of what we did the previous year last month. Nancy's high-pitched voice made my head hurt. Nevertheless, I created that thing, and I am the owner of the patent. Naturally, after I departed, sales would decline. What? Nancy appeared astounded by what I had said. A patent? You created it? No way. You were merely a titleless, worthless employee. You had nothing to do with development. It's true that when you joined 20 years ago, I wasn't a lead developer. I've been helping the development team lately. When I first started working for the company at the age of 18, many of my coworkers didn't think highly of me. They undoubtedly thought I would quit shortly since they couldn't believe a former troublemaker like me would work seriously. Thomas, however, always had faith in me. Merely carrying out your duties is insufficient if you wish to establish your worth to the other workers. Thomas used to tell me, you have to do something they can't. I may be a better mathematician than most. Although it seemed like years had passed since I had brought up math, I did recall something. There were some pretty intelligent students in my high school, one of whom had won a global math competition. For amusement, the student once offered me a task that resembled a puzzle. Try solving this. It may have been harassment in retrospect, but I was able to solve the riddle in a matter of minutes. Begun in shock, the student whispered, "This is a finals problem." Although I didn't give it much thought at the time, it was probably an issue from the World Math Competition Finals. I solved it so fast that the student was taken aback. Thomas handed me a book of arithmetic problems as soon as he heard this. It was a book that taught formulas and mathematical theorems as well. After completing the problem book in a single day, Thomas handed me what he referred to as a skill test. Thomas was astounded when he reviewed my responses. "These are questions from the entrance exam of Harvard University," he murmured, "and you got a perfect score." This demonstrated my extraordinary aptitude for mathematics. As advised by Thomas, I began preparing to enroll in college. Math alone won't get you into Harvard University, but if you're really good, some foreign universities will waive other subject exams. I therefore went to study overseas during my second year at the company. All of my tuition was covered by Thomas. There, with an emphasis on glass manufacturing, I studied chemical engineering, materials chemistry, and materials engineering. After finishing my graduate studies, I came back to the United States at the age of 25. I used what I learned in college to create a kind of glass that wasn't available in the United States. Making the most impact-resistant glass was my goal. In several areas, particularly in brand recognition, which is vital in the United States, our company was unable to compete with large corporations. We were therefore forced to create goods that only our business could manufacture. I created the strongest impact-resistant glass in the world. It soon rose to the top of the industry's sales charts. Nancy appeared shocked when I told her my story. "I know you invented that glass, but why do you own the patent yourself?" Typically, the business owns the patent for the inventions made there. Thomas made that choice. The glass was my own creation, not the work of the entire firm. Thomas felt that since I created the patent, it should be mine, but I didn't mind that the corporation owned it. Thomas detested injustice and believed that my accomplishment should not belong to the firm. It didn't matter to me because I made the product to assist Thomas. However, I submitted my own patent application because Thomas insisted. Our customers would inevitably start purchasing from us once the best-selling product transferred to my new business. Our business swiftly took back the top position in the sector. What will our organization do now? You could put us out of business. You ungrateful individual, how do you think Thomas would feel about this? Nancy yelled and looked at me. "Excuse me for a moment." With a worried-looking David at his heels, President Johnson burst into the meeting room. David has told me the majority of the scenario, and I could hear what was being said outside. "Unfortunately, your business is in danger of going bankrupt," President Johnson stated coolly. Nancy gave a tongue click. "What? This elderly man? I'm conversing with him. I'm President Johnson." "Well, you're not wrong calling me an old man," President Johnson remarked, continuing to ignore Nancy's remarks. "You're not even close to understanding him. Thomas would absolutely not want Will to remain at that company." Nancy scowled at what President Johnson had said. "What are you discussing? Our business is in danger of going bankrupt because of his departure. Thomas would undoubtedly be upset about his business failing. For Thomas, Will, whom he considered a brother, was more important than the corporation. Will was the reason behind all Thomas did at that organization." As he stated this, President Johnson gave me a glance. "Yes, I think so." He always agreed right away when I expressed that I didn't want a job and that I preferred to concentrate on assistance and development. He never turned down my requests for development funding, no matter how big. He purchased the pricey equipment I requested without asking for further information. Some may believe that Thomas lavished me with attention, but he constantly told me, "An older brother naturally wants to spoil his younger brother. I know you've always worked hard for me." Thomas supported me outside of work as well. He always went to family gatherings and sobbed the most at my wedding, while sitting by himself in the family area. I really thought of Thomas as an elder brother. I don't think Thomas would be upset just because Will quit the company. Instead, he's most likely frantically attempting to learn Will's fate. In the industry, there are already reports that we quit due to some abuse. Thomas repeatedly confronted me after I made the decision to leave, demanding to know who had done what to me, but I never told him. If Thomas found out, I was afraid of what he would do to Nancy. When President Johnson said, "The fact that Will applied for the patent in his name rather than the company's shows where Thomas's priorities lie," Nancy appeared inconsolable. So our company is really, if things continue as they are, it will likely go bankrupt, thanks to you. When President Johnson struck the last blow, Nancy fell to her knees. However, I've heard that Richard Anderson, your president, is quite capable and is making a lot of effort to improve the situation. But you will undoubtedly lose your job. I smiled and added, "I wonder how much the damages will be," which made Nancy scream a little. Thomas will discover the truth in due time. He's incredibly frightening when he's upset, especially when I'm involved, I continued. It's true that Thomas is an overly protective brother. Thomas still feels the urge to keep me safe despite his advanced age. What comes next is something I'm eager to witness. All right, time to get to work. When you're finished with it, kindly depart. I walked out of the conference room. Nancy was left standing in disbelief when President Johnson departed as well. Nancy was then taken before the disciplinary committee, given a large sum of money to pay for damages, and fired right away. She was also sued for mistreating the young workers she made quit, some of whom required mental health care. Thomas was responsible for these young workers' compensation claims. When Thomas found this, he went over to the young workers and said, "Let's sue for damages. I'll pay all legal fees." In addition, Thomas chose to sue Nancy for the money she spent on the suit that she destroyed, as well as the psychological distress it caused me. I laughed in spite of myself when Thomas even began searching for further items he could claim. Nancy would never be able to pay off her obligations in her lifetime because they continued mounting. Richard was putting a lot of effort into keeping my former business from going bankrupt. He was also thinking of combining the business into a bigger organization. Richard's commitment to safeguarding every employee over his own position was something I greatly admired. Their livelihoods would be safe, but the company's identity might vanish. Thomas arrived at my place with a birthday gift after the commotion with Nancy subsided. He gave me a suit that was just like the one that had been torn up. I considered purchasing you something nicer, but this suit holds a particular place in my heart as well. Thomas borrowed money from the then president to have this outfit created because it was much more than he could afford on his salary at the time. Since it was your first outfit, I wanted to look nice in front of my younger brother. Thomas narrowed his brows tenderly and recalled, "I didn't want to get you something cheap. I didn't need to borrow money to purchase it this time." Heaven must be a proud place for the former president. The previous president was as much a father figure to Thomas as he was to me. Thomas had been a delinquent for a few more years before his retirement, but the previous president had assisted in his reform. I'm bored. Perhaps I ought to request President Anderson's employment as well. Thomas's remarks, which could have been seen as a jest or as serious, made me giggle. It was a miracle I met Thomas at my high school job. Thomas was the only brother I ever had because of his intense love for me, as I had never felt loved by my parents.